morning, this is Tara, and I'm just going to give a few minutes to let other people into the room if they'd like to attend. I will go ahead and get started. My name is Tara McParland. I work for the Department of Natural Resources within the Office of Water Resources. And today we will be talking about climate change topic, flood damage mitigation, and data management. And I also have Laura Kiefer in the room, and she is the committee lead for the data management category or topic. So I thought we'd go ahead and start with just giving a brief overview of the website. And I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that there is a task force website. And this is where you'll find a lot of information about the project itself. And right now we are at the public outreach meetings, outreach 2. And just in case you didn't get a chance before this meeting, there is a good introduction. You can either look at it as a video or a slideshow, and those links are right here. And those give an introduction to all the different topics and all the current recommendations. And then after this call,
can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. So the draft recommendations, I did watch the slideshow or the video, but
okay.
the draft recommendations are only available. They're not in a document, right? They're just in the slides.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
We're developing the report as we go forward, and I can tell you more about that, but this is sort of the interim project.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, sure. And then afterwards, after this meeting, or if you share with other people that might be interested, we do have a public survey that asks specific questions about the recommendations, or if you have any input, you're welcome to add through the public survey. Or if you have additional questions or additional recommendations that don't really suit the public survey, you're welcome to send them as an email to this email that's also on the website. And just so you know, Amelia, that this website also has some other information. This is our previous public outreach. All the meetings were recorded, and they are here if you're interested. At that stage of the project, we were just trying to solicit input onto what the main issues were. So yeah, we have our 13. Okay.
I watched that too, so I'm good there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, and then we also have all the different leads for the different topics if you're interested in reaching out to them directly. And then on the bottom here is our schedule of where we plan to be. And right now we're still in the developing recommendations phase. We're soliciting input, and then the committees will develop their final recommendations based on the input from the public. And then we turn it into an actual report that will be submitted for the public to view again, and we'll have one more public outreach to get further input. And then the last thing I wanted to show you on the very bottom, just so for interest, the State Water Plan was originally developed in 1967, and we have copies of all the reports and all the sub-special reports that were written over time. It's just more interesting, and the ones that are in bold are the main updates to the State Water Plans across time. And our last one was completed in 1994. So any questions on the website or the information that's out there right now?
No, thank you. I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. And so I was just going to give you a quick overview, even though you watched the slides. So maybe I'll just give a quick overview, and then, you can stop me at any point. For the climate change, what we're really talking about are the climate change topics a little different than the other 12 topics in that it really does affect all the other topics. And we're including this section, or all of these will be chapters in the report. And we're including climate change because as an introduction and to explain maybe the main facets of climate change. But each section will be discussing how climate change impacts their topic directly. So this is going to be more of an overview and basics for climate change understanding for the rest of the topics. But they are going to talk about certain issues that or sub-issues that they see that probably impact most of the different water topics. And that's the flash drought, the rainfall seasonality, and the land use changing. And what we are finding a lot, especially because I'm in the flood group, is that urban flooding is changing because of a lot of factors, but climate change is one of them. And in addition to the urban growth, the climate, it affects the whole water cycle in those areas. And then the climate change recommendations specifically are going to be addressing, or they're going to be suggesting that more research and outreach is needed. And these are the areas that they want to focus on. And then they also wanted to make sure we understood that there are different impacts based on agriculture, urban, and then extreme weather. And obviously you can stop me at any time if you have any specific questions, but I'll keep going for now. I'm the committee lead for the flood damage mitigation, and we really obviously are trying to reverse or reduce impacts for flooding. We broke it up into hazard identification, and right top number one priority is based on the long-term precipitation changes based on climate change. We need to make sure that we incorporate that into our projections and also those future land use changes. And we also have a lot of models out there, but many are outdated. Several areas in the state do not have models. So we're trying to come up with ways to update those models, but maybe not do it to the extent required for a FEMA full regulatory model. And this would allow us to utilize existing updates in technological information like LIDAR and information that's out there, and just do a cursory model for the areas that are missing. And so the decision makers can use those models to help them to determine what's going on at the time during a flood, and then also help them mitigate after a flood.
Can you tell me what LIDAR, I'm sorry, I'm new to this arena kind of. Can you tell me what LIDAR is?
LIDAR is a way that they've been able to determine topography. In the old days, you had to go out with a survey crew and measure all the elevations of the land. And now they use new technology. And honestly, I don't really even know much about it, but it provides those elevations by flying planes. And it's able to, generally, that information can be brought into a mapping application called GIS.
Oh, gotcha.
And
okay.
It's just a lot faster and a lot less it's a lot less expensive than the old days of how we used to gather that information.
Right.
And that's usually available by public domain. So it's a great resource. that we're just starting to take advantage of. So the next
I can
area
in a little bit, Tara, in that,
yeah,
it's
please
it's
do.
mounted on an airplane and it actually uses light detection and ranges on the bounce back of the light reflection. And it's obviously closer to the ground than satellite. And they're getting very, very precise. It's amazing the terrain essentially you can create from that. So
Is it LIDAR, LIDAR? Is that the
yes,
acronym?
yeah.
Okay.
So you can probably look that up.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Sure. And then the next area that we really want to focus on, or our group is recommending that we really want to have better prediction tools using those models and that new data that's available. We want to make more inundation mapping. And inundation mapping is a great way to show different areas at different rainfall events. And it shows how much of an area would be flooded based on that potential rainfall. And it can be done for several different types of rainfall events. So you have a better idea, so those community planners can know which roads are going to be flooded, which ones they need to let the public know or have potential issues, what areas might flood. So that's a great tool that we want to develop and make more available for communities to help them make their decisions. And then we're also trying to do more damage assessments for structures within different flooding areas. And that also helps to determine which areas should be focused on for either mitigative efforts or also which areas might cost the most if they were to flood in terms of damages. And then we're also focusing on, my mouse is a little touchy today, so I apologize. I'm not going to use that. So the other area for the entire project is we're trying to focus on social equity and environmental justice. And we're recognizing that certain areas don't have access to the same amount of information. So this is something that we really want to make sure that when you sell a property or buy a property, that you know more information if it had sewer backup or if it actually is in a floodplain. And we also want to make that inundation mapping that we're going to be developing available so that when people choose to purchase their properties, they have all the information that they need.
So you call that social,
social
what and environmental justice?
Yeah, it's social equity.
Social equity.
There's a lot of different names. It can be social justice and environmental justice.
Mm-hmm.
And basically we're trying to focus on areas that are vulnerable already because of their location.
Right.
And there's also related to equity in terms of there's racial, economic, and then ability. And those are all related to areas that we want to make sure that all three of those areas within equity are treated fairly. So that's been a big focus both in the government and in a lot of the different environmental groups. So this mitigation, it means that you're trying to fix, we know an area might flood, so mitigation actually means we're trying to develop ways to prevent that from happening in the future. And there's a lot of different mitigative efforts out there, but what we're finding is, like everything in the country, the infrastructure that's out there is aging and needs to be updated or upgraded. And then there are some areas that need new flood protection infrastructure. So that's going to be one of our recommendations, is to focus on those areas that are aging and need upgrades, but also focus on those socioeconomically disadvantaged areas. And then another area that our group has determined that appears to be quite important from the public is that we really want to start utilizing more natural systems and use that in our planning and to provide technical support and guidance to some of those communities that might not have the resources or have understanding of how to get grants and how to understand what mitigation options are out there. So the first recommendation is to form a guidance group of different experts to help those different communities find the resources that are available that they might not know about. And then another area that we've seen a lot of success is when communities partner. A lot of our flooding occurs along rivers in Illinois. And what one community does to fix a problem might impact another community. So what we're finding is nearby communities, when they form partnerships and they can work together, they can share resources, they can share those funding sources, they can share their experts within their own staffing. And it seems to be a lot more productive, and it optimizes their spending and the benefits to their mitigative efforts. So we're going to try to provide incentives to communities that form these partnerships. And then we also have some future long-term efforts that we're going to just put in the report just to make sure that they get addressed in the future when these other issues are addressed. But we just want to, again, make sure that the different communities are aware of their funding. And so that means we need to work with different counties and municipalities that if they put these mitigative efforts on their action plans, that is required to make them eligible for some of these funding sources. And what we're finding is some of those communities don't put that on their action plan, so they automatically do not get to be considered for some of these fundings. And then for future mitigation, we really just want to have a database and a priority list of which areas of the state need the mitigative efforts first. And we also want to provide incentive to communities to start utilizing more green and environmentally friendly design options. And we might need to work with some regulatory groups to make sure that those types of improvements are allowed. Because right now, some of the regulations don't necessarily allow those new options. And then I'll go ahead and let Laura talk about the data management.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Who develops these? I guess it's probably too big of a question. Who develops the plans generally? Is it like the Emergency Planning Commission, or is it the county, or is it just vary throughout the state? I mean, is that an awareness issue that they don't know that they need to include that information to be eligible for that funding?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
The plans are the local community leaders, but also sometimes it is their, that's why this is a big area. It's sometimes at the county and municipality level, but the counties come up with their own emergency action plan, and that has to be on their, the need needs to be put on their plan the year before to be eligible for this type of funding.
Okay.
So that's at the county level, but then there's these other HUD funds that the municipalities need to include. So it seems like a simple solution just to let them know, but for some reason that hasn't occurred at this time. So that was just a need that was identified.
Thank you.
Okay, Laura.
Yeah, I'm Laura Kiefer. I'm from the Illinois State Water Survey, and our group it's listed as data management, but we decided to really hone in on stream data management and particularly stream flow, and that can include just water level data at a particular point, or the whole stream volume at that point. And the stream data is really just like climate change is a cross-cutting issue because it supplies important information to a lot of people. It's the underpinning of a lot of activities, particularly just what Tara got done talking about is data that contributes to the hydrologic models that are needed for some of the flood mitigation. There are hydraulic models that need stream channel information and other information, but the flow volumes need to be more definitive, and that's where that really helps out in that aspect. And we had three main issues that we thought, problems or issues that need to be handled, and so we had come up with three recommendations, and basically that there just really isn't enough stream gauging or stream data in the rural watersheds or smaller sized watersheds as funds get axed and things like that, and the USGS needs to concentrate, on at least getting something for a water body. They have to keep moving downstream to capture more area, and the streams react differently when they're 50 square miles of drainage versus 500. And so understanding these reactions and having the data for that actually refines models, and you have much better information. And it very is tied in, very keenly with the climate change issues, and especially the increase in extreme rainfall events. So we really think that this having a variable scale of drainage areas having data collected is extremely important. There's also having long-term stations, being able to understand the effect of climate change happening over the last, 30, 40, 50 years. We wouldn't be able to understand better these impacts if we didn't have stream gauging stations that go back 100 years. But they're fewer than what we would like. And so we would like to make sure that no matter where they are, these long-term stations remain. And then the stations that we do have, even though maybe they could be just 10, 20, 30 years long, we need to keep these so they become the investment in the future long-term stations. So we're trying to essentially keep what we have and expand it a little bit more. However, from making those decisions, ultimately what needs to be done is that we need to understand what data is being collected in the state and how and for what purposes. So recommending forming a working group to evaluate these current and the various stream data networks operating within the state. The water survey, well, we operate our own and they're more on a project level basis. The USGS obviously is around longer. There's a lot of organizations and government organizations, especially in Northeast Illinois, that are running some of their own. And in the past, the State Water Planning Task Force twice in the past has asked the Water Survey to evaluate the stream gauging networks within the state to make recommendations. And as we all know, funding, is getting pretty tight, and leveraging each other's work for a multitude of different purposes really is the best way to go. And so what we'd like to do is evaluate all the data and then really kind of develop a business plan that would leverage, coordinate, and for funding and promote the support of statewide stream data, and actually form a collaborative where people agree to work together and share information about what they're doing, why they're doing it, what can other people use it, and be more thoughtful maybe about collaborating where and when stream data is being collected, and maybe even maybe not be able to get everybody on the same quality or frequency of data, but at least understanding what's going to be available and see if we can work together. So this is going to be quite an asset to the Illinois Flood Center that was recommended in the Integrated Water Management critical topic that the Water Survey, which is inside the Prairie Research Institute, is proposing the development of over the next few years. So, data, I'm a scientist. We always want data, but we don't have as much data as we used to, and it's becoming more and more important, and honing in on better data in the right places. And we can't do it unless we work together. So, and a lot of this information would feed into a lot of things that even Tara talked about, that the additional data will provide, products for stakeholders and communities to make planning decisions and apply for grants and implement mitigation projects, et cetera. So it's really a domino effect in that. So we're excited about these recommendations and seeing where we can take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So at this point, I would just open it up to any specific questions. about our areas, and just to remind both of, now it looks like we have Mary Pat came into the room, and just remind you guys that all these are being recorded, and they will be posted on that website that I showed earlier. And if you missed another topic, because we did have to divide, you're welcome to go and look at those presentations as well.
Thanks. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Sure.
This is Mary Pat. I do have a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. It's kind of a treat to have such a small group, but it's sort of surprised there aren't more people here. My name is Mary Pat McGuire. I'm faculty here at the University of Illinois. I apologize for some mowers in the background. I'm in landscape architecture. I'm in the Department of Landscape Architecture and have worked a bit with some other colleagues at the Prairie Research Institute here at the university in the geology survey and the water survey. So it's a pleasure to be on this call also with Laura. And I'm really interested in how data collection and modeling and the proposal for the Illinois flood, I'm sorry, I forgot what it's called, the Illinois Flood
Center.
Flood Center, thank you, starts to address the differences between stream-based flooding versus urban flooding, or what we might think of as natural waterway flooding and urban flooding. And I'm wondering about that because most of the work that I do with communities and with different types of organizations in the public sector has to do with urban flooding in the Chicago region. And it's such a complicated knot, of missing data, a lot of disconnected models that aren't talking to each other, maybe a lack of even mapping of basic infrastructure to address urban flooding. And of course, a lot of communities who don't have the resources to do their own data collection or to understand how to address urban flooding, not just through great infrastructure upgrades, but who really want to do more natural systems, green infrastructure. And it's just a competitive world up there for funding, even the funding that exists that they know about, there's just not enough to go around. So I'm wondering, how do we, first of all, think about these as somewhat, or would you agree with me or disagree with me that they're somewhat separate areas for focus, the stream-based flooding issues or floodplain issues and urban flooding? And in the urban flooding world, how can we create greater resources and tools to address those high population areas related to urban flooding, which is just a tangle, as I just described? How can we could we place in the proposed flood center, for example, more emphasis on urban flooding specifically and give some focus to that area?
Tara, I'll go ahead and just speak in general about the Illinois Flood Center, and then I know you can speak pretty well to the urban flooding issues. The Illinois Flood Center is a recent brainchild idea that's been presented this year to our own advisory board. And it's very in the wee beginnings of development. We're trying to spend probably the next 2 to 3 years developing I guess for lack of a better term, a business plan, a programmatic approach as to how this would be developed, and probably in a phased approach, all the while trying to find funding, but nobody's going to fund you until you have really a really good idea of what it is you want to do. But the Flood Center wants to become someplace that people can go to for information. It would be, not only not so much a clearinghouse, but at least knowing, where people could be pointed for information, but yet being able to go to some place that might be able to do those models for you or do that data collection for you, or being able to assemble the information needed to provide to other people. And the Flood Center would be one giant collaborative too. I mean, OWR would be a principal partner you know, as well as other organizations. But so we're at the very beginnings of this, and I like your input about how, you know, the urban flooding issues, like you said, is a tangled mess up there. There are obviously communities in the rural areas that have Watseka, I think of, just north of here, has a tremendous problem with flooding, and in their area. So trying to, I think, dividing up, you know, the types of issues is probably going to be the way to go. So I appreciate your, I know it's a question, but I'm going to take that as a way, as a comment to give to the group as we proceed developing of this center.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks, Laura.
Sorry, go ahead, Terry.
Sure. And so in terms of, you had several very, very important issues, and I'm going to try to address them separately. Yeah, we recognize that urban and riverine flooding are very different. And the riverine definitely seems to be within the Office of Water Resources and DNR's purview. Urban flooding is generally related to stormwater management. And you know, we know that there's combined sewers, and we also have separate sewers, and they have very different issues and they have different impacts. And then we also have other, I think what I alluded to earlier, there's land use changes as things get developed. They're constantly changing in the urban environment. And then in conjunction with climate change, all those are impacting. Urban flooding is becoming more and more of a problem in the state of Illinois. So as our group went forward with different topics, that definitely came forward. And stormwater management is generally under the EPA's or IEPA's purview. With their, they have more of the regulations. And so the idea was that eventually we have more urban flooding tracking. I know I'm personally working on a project about urban flooded warning systems that we're trying to implement as a pilot program, just to see if we can get something like that out there to let people know when a flood's coming quickly, because sewer backup is primarily the biggest costly impact of urban flooding. I mean, besides roads closing and all those other impacts, but that's a very high cost portion of urban flooding. So we're trying to come up with techniques. But in this water plan, we talked about we really need to increase the size of those sewers. It's just such a huge effort. Apparently, in the past, we designed sewers for a 10-year storm event. And we know that we're having larger and higher frequency storms than that. And so we definitely need to have more infrastructure in place. And so part of some of our suggestions were tied a little bit. I'm just going to bring these back forward. When we talk about mitigation, we really want to use more watershed level, but also using these green flood prevention strategies all around. So when we get this guidance group, we're hoping that they can help some of these urban and rural communities with ideas and incentives and partnerships to leverage their resources. But then we also talked about in the future, when we talk about funding, you brought forward funding. There's not enough funding. All of these 13 topics are most likely, most of the recommendations require some sort of funding or enhancing existing funding. So what our group has been talking about is coming up with collaborative and nonprofit organizations are sometimes coming in with funding options. And we need to really get more creative. We can't just continue. The purpose of this report is to take to the General Assembly, and then they take our recommendations and hopefully fund and or change legislation to allow these recommendations to occur. But in the past, it was all on the state. So we need to come up with more creative ways to suggest that we might be able to leverage some federal funding for some research, like for climate change, because that's a global issue. And again, maybe coming up with creative partnerships with public-private partnerships to allow some of these projects to be completed. So those are the kinds of things we're going to suggest we need to think a little bit outside of the box, and that's why we're trying to pull the public in. There's so much expertise out there and great ideas that have come forward, at least even just within my own committee, that things are changing. So we recognize that, and funding is always going to be one of our stumbling blocks. But I will add that the last time that this state water plan was developed, somebody that was on the task force has just retired. But he said he worked for EPA, and he said that he started about 20 years ago, and every single program that was funded within his department all stemmed from the state water plan recommendations. So they took the recommendations and they turned them into programs. And that's what we're requesting, that they fund different staff or new staff or allocate funding for a program to help work on these recommendations. So that's our ultimate goal. And then the last thing I'll add is that this is within the next 5 years. And like Laura said, it takes a few years just to even develop something like a flood center. But our hope is to update the state water plan every 5 years now. This has become our goal. And so what we're suggesting now will hopefully get implemented. We recognize probably not everything, but we're hoping in the next 5 years we add that some of these will be completed, and then we add new tasks. And I know urban flooding will be one of those, the next big issue. But on the same hand, what we're hoping is that we keep this website that we have. We want it to be more interactive. We don't want it just to be a report every 5 years. So we're hoping that we can communicate with everybody and let them know status reports and let them know what actually is occurring and keep everybody updated as we move forward. And hopefully with the public support and all the outreach, we find that people's attention talks. So we're hoping by sharing and really keeping everybody informed that the legislators or the people that make the decisions recognize how important this is.
Yeah, and Tara,
I know I rambled.
Oh no, Tara, I'd like to back up to too, is that this is a voluntary collaboration between all the agencies and organizations that are involved in developing this plan. The state water plan has never really been law or even policy. It's been people coming together as a group and saying, we think these are the things that are important. So it serves as a guidepost of which then we really, depend on stakeholders, the people, very interested parties, all the other people who are working really hard for the environment and water quality in the state, to then partner with these agencies and help produce policy or funding and help get these things done, and kind of helping each other with that. So obviously, as you can tell, when Tara talked about the person on her committee that retired after 20 years, the agencies take these seriously and they work on them. So it's more than guideline, but I guess less than policy. It's an agreed spirit of what we need to do. And I like the idea of not waiting every 30 years to do a plan. If it's done every 5 years, it then becomes a living document, and then I think has so much more value. So
yeah, especially with the kind of acceleration of incidents that were storm events, et cetera, changing climate models, et cetera, that's starting to make so much more of the need for physical change necessary in our land across our landscapes.
Yeah,
I really appreciate both Laura and Tara, your responses, and from my perspective, working with communities on green infrastructure planning and looking at urban flooding and really focusing a lot of my effort in the Chicago and larger Cook County region. I really would love to see in this water plan, as you're suggesting, we could have a kind of breakout focus on urban flooding within the within something like a flood center, or at least as a part of the state water plan, that we develop a real study around the potential for nature-based infrastructure to supplement the reliance that we have on gray. In some situations, the increasing gray infrastructure is not going to solve some of our urban flooding issues because of either topographic conditions. We have a lot of low slope, low lying areas. We have so altered the capacity of the land and the soil systems through just high percentages of imperviousness to function well for storm mitigation. And yet, if we were to start to retrofit and work back into those conditions and resuscitate soils and create green infrastructure networks, we have a strong potential then to address a lot of that urban flooding through nature-based solutions. But to date, there's not really been, at least to my knowledge, a really sound study about what the green-gray relationship is across that region, northeastern Illinois, and concentrated along the coast of Lake Michigan. And this is an area I think would be a really groundbreaking area for collaboration, and also to think about not just what the physical plan might look like, but how that could be funded and have funding specifically for that purpose. That communities, I mean, right now communities have to apply for funding, and it's just we're using a lot of incredible goodwill on the part of communities, but not really meeting the needs there. I mean, the process right now doesn't really have dedicated funding to support something that's been studied across our different institutions and in depth. And so there's some gap there. There's some missing piece between the research community and the policy community, and then the folks who are living in these spaces. So I'm just really would love to see something like that be a part of this plan, where we take areas where we know there are recurring issues and we develop real physical plans for those regions. And I think about, like Peoria might be an interesting model where, as a city within our state has decided to meet EPA's or the EPA's consent decree through green infrastructure to support their effort, and also to learn from them and to see whether or not we might be able to apply what they're doing to other urbanized areas around the state that have flooding issues.
No, that's a great idea, and if you don't mind, you have some great ideas that I wasn't really able to capture at all. If you could use the link in the email and maybe just send your ideas to me, or no, just send it to that email and I'll get it. And I can take that to my committee, because mine's more the flood, and that's where the urban flooding comes in. And if you have any specific recommendations, because we're at the recommendation stage, that I could bring forward to the committee. Like I said, the urban flooding was on our list, but we had to prioritize. We had about 30 items, and we had to bring it down to about 10. So maybe I can bring that forward to the committee and see if it can be moved back to the head.
Okay, Tara, thank you. I will. I'll try to put some maybe more concise and maybe more specific recommendations into a note. Thank you very much.
No, sure, that would be great. Well, at this point, I believe the wrap up is occurring. So what you can do is leave this meeting and go back to the first link that was Wes's meeting. Mary Pat, were you able to find that particular meeting before?
Yeah, I think we have to go out and then come back in. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not really, okay.
So I just wanted to say, go ahead and do that, and go back to that intro, and we'll be doing a little summary from all the different sections.
Okay.
So I really appreciate you guys attending and asking great questions. And again, fill out that public survey and send me any specific ideas that you have. That would be awesome. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.